I'm Dr. John Kruse, and today I'm going to be talking about emotions. What good are they? And this talk's going to be a little broader, less tied to specific research findings, sort of more generalizable about my thoughts about emotions and how to work with them and view them. So I'll sort of start with the take-home message is, what good are emotions? And I'd say emotions are essential for us to make sense of our complicated world and for us to communicate with each other. So that's the take home. So again, so often in mental health particularly, we're working on regulating emotions, controlling emotions, stopping emotions, as it were, shutting them off, shutting them down. And it helps to understand more about why we have emotions and how emotions work in order to do those things, and also to identify the many situations where we don't want to be doing that. And I'm aware that why questions, particularly in psychology, but even in general biology, are sort of Rudyard Kipling's just so stories. They are stories we're making up. I think the evidence is pretty overwhelming that as biological organisms, we are shaped by natural selection, and natural selection is not sitting there with a design plan and saying 2 million years from now I want organisms that are doing X, Y, or Z. It's preserving traits in the population that are of value right now to producing more kids and getting more genes into the next generation. And hopefully those are of useful benefit to the species over the long term. If they're not, then that species may go extinct. So I'm not going to get into philosophical battles there. I'm not going to. Star Trek probably has done a much better in-depth philosophical job of, comparing Mr. Spock with Captain Kirk or other travelers on the Enterprise to highlighting what good are emotions. But so again, the two big points are emotions are here because each moment we are bombarded by hundreds of thousands, millions of pieces of information. So just at a visual sense already, I can look at the wall, I can see a chair, I can see hats on the wall, I can see coats. If I look down, I see each item I'm looking at is composed of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pixelated information. In addition to my visual sensation, I have proprioceptive information coming in from my body, what the chair feels like, what it feels like to be in this posture, the sound of my voice, how that's reverberating, or hopefully you can hear it clearly today. Auditory information. So every second we are bombarded by millions of pieces of information, and not all of that needs to be attended to, not all of that's important. I would argue that primarily a job of our emotional system is saying, hey, this is really important, you need to be paying attention to it, either because your life is in danger or your goals are going to be thwarted if you're not paying attention to it. And then second, another important feature is that human beings, many primates, are social animals, and a big part of emotions is conveying not just to yourself what's important out there, but conveying so that others know what's important to you and what theoretically may also be important to them. So it's a social signaling and well as a salience system. So when we talk about emotions, and particularly it may be different in different cultures using different, or in different languages, different words or experiences, but usually if you mention emotions, what does sad or happy or angry or joy bring up in you? Most people's initial response, thought, explanation cognitively is that it's an internal feeling state. And what I want to get at is, in addition to the internal feeling state of sadness or joy or anger, which is subjective and hard for us to describe cognitively and linguistically, but intrinsically linked to that response, there are other physiological things going on. So there are facial expressions that are linked to each of the basic emotions, at least. So I'll be getting to that. And again, that's not just a separate completely carved off. That is inextricably wired in, linked to the same part of the processor of what an emotion is. There are also what some people have called action potentials, but that has a different meaning as well. I call action tendencies. So it's not that anger makes you slam your fist into the wall, but it predisposes you for it, shunting blood to the major muscles of the body. It's shunting blood away from digestive systems and other parts of the body. So there are certain physiologic blood pressure, heart rate are affected. So there are physiologic and motor movement action tendencies that are intrinsic and part of each basic emotion. And another part of each of the basic emotions is that each of them is triggered. Essentially, the brain has a template of a specific thing that's going to trigger that emotion. So it's in some ways comparable to an instinct, or this is a not cognitive process. This is a faster than cognitive process. But what triggers fear is thought that this is a danger, this is a threat to my life or to bodily injury, or as we become more sophisticated, involved over time, it could be extended to a psychological threat. So a fear that my bank account's going to be cut off. That's not directly, immediately leading to my death or life or loss, but it's the same association that this is a danger to my integrity as a social being. So when we talk about basic emotions, there's not even complete agreement among emotion researchers, and for decades, I mean until I'd say maybe the last 30, 40 years, emotions were considered not even a topic that could be, again, that the essence, that the feeling state is so subjective and hard to describe that particularly early in the days of neuroscience, this was considered sort of off limits if you couldn't quantify it, if you couldn't define it clearly. So, jumping back on track, basic emotions, there's not complete consensus, but I'd say many people would come up with a list of fear. So we feel fear when, as I've said, there's a danger to your life, or physical integrity, you're going to lose a limb or something like that. So it's an immediate threat. Sadness, another basic emotion, is fundamentally about loss. You've already had a loss, clearly not of your life, but of something major and important to you. Anger gets triggered when we perceive something to be unfair, and that we can't do much about it. Joy is about attaining something desirable or something pleasurable. Disgust is about assessing something as poisonous or that we don't want to ingest or put into our body, and again, psychologically extending that can be, we can be disgusted, not just things that will physically poison us and kill us, but by particularly certain groups or classes of people or other behaviors that we don't want to incorporate, we want to view as others. Shame is more about loss as social level, about our fear of our loss of acceptance because we've violated certain social boundaries or rules or our own internal rules of conduct. And I'm not going to get too much into shame-guilt differences or disgust, scorn differences, or fear and anxiety. I'll sort of simplify it there. And again, an intrinsic part of each emotion is a facial expression. So in the 60s, there was still a considerable discussion among theorists as to whether emotions were completely social constructs or whether there was something innate and biological. And it was largely work by Paul Ekman, traveling to remote areas of Papua New Guinea, where they had not seen any white man, any person from his culture before. And through translators, he could show them pictures of a sad face or an angry face or a joyous face, and they could relate to and understand with a similar, they understood what those emotions were. They used facial expressions similarly to signal those emotions. And that doesn't mean that the same thing evoked fear in a Westerner as Papua New Guinean, or anger or joy. So again, that template, or what triggers an emotion, certainly can vary culture to culture and can certainly vary within a culture. So many people are terrified of snakes, but herpetologists handle snakes every day and love the critters. So it's not... So again, although parts of this can be culturally derived, parts of this can be learned, those sort of basic filters or or what triggers the basic emotions are the same across cultures. So again, I think it pays to highlight that the limbic system, which is what we call the emotionally wired system, parts of the amygdala, the hippocampus, parts of the hypothalamus, some of the lower centrally located cortical structures, that these systems to evoke an emotion are shorter. There's fewer neural connections than conscious awareness and thought. So I'll be getting to that in a minute. So these are quick responses. And in addition to the quick neural activation that elicits an emotional response, there may well be neurochemical releases, things like adrenaline or cortisol may be flooding the body as well, and that neurohumoral response may make parts of the emotional response linger for more than a few fractions of a second. So that's important. So that's about all I'll say about the basic workings of emotions, and now I'm going to switch over to how we can use that to working and dealing, not just in the psychotherapy realm, but in your own lives. And one of my cardinal rules that would follow from what we've just said is that your initial emotional reaction to something is always appropriate. That may sound a little bizarre. I'm not saying it's helpful or desirable or functional. What I'm saying is appropriate. And I'm saying it's appropriate because it was triggered before you could use conscious, rational thought to evaluate it. So you may decide. So a side point. Emotions, can be really good at re-triggering or re-evoking themselves. Particularly, we think of anger. If something's being unfair and then you're yelling about it and protesting and someone's still not listening, that response and your anger may actually trigger anger in them, but it's re-triggering anger, you're being reactivated. There's feedback loops that can perpetuate emotions, but the very initial response, you don't have any choice about. So I would argue it's always appropriate, and therefore, secondary responses to it, and being ashamed is one, being scared if you're not used to being angry and you're being angry, but in our society, particularly, there are some stereotypical male responses. So any displays of emotion are often thought of as conveying weakness. So if I showed fear in a situation or anxiety, I may feel shame about it secondarily, but more importantly, men often use anger at themselves or anger then directed at others when they themselves are feeling scared or afraid. So again, the initial emotional response, though, is appropriate. So if you yourself are getting ashamed of your initial emotion or angry at it, or the part of the unlearning is to be kinder and gentler with yourself and accepting. Okay, that's what came up immediately. Once I'm aware, so if someone throws a Nerf ball at my face and I'm scared, I flinch, I react. My friends laugh at me. I may feel ashamed because I fell for their trick. But again, it's a cheap trick because you didn't have any choice about being flinching or afraid. Once you know that they have a Nerf ball in their hand and they're throwing it right at your face, you may have a blink response if they throw it right at your eyes, but you're probably not going to be afraid unless it's knocking over your valuable lamp or doing something other damage like that. So again, initial emotional response are always appropriate. Be okay with them, again. So, second, connected with that is, in order to change or work with emotions, you need to be aware that you're having an emotion, and again, getting back to even if your initial response was appropriate, that doesn't mean it's necessarily helpful, it doesn't mean it's desirable, it doesn't mean it's functional, particularly to continue and perpetuate it. So, and getting back to the fact that emotions do need to be retriggered. So again, the neural component, the neural activation component lasts just fractions of a second. There again may be humoral, neurochemical aspects that last a little longer. But the Nerf ball is a good example. You're not still shaking in fear for minutes after someone threw a Nerf ball at your face. The fear is gone. On the other hand, right now, if you're in a Ukrainian subway hiding from Russian bombs, it's appropriate that your fear is ongoing or fitting for the situation because it's being re-triggered. There are stimuli situations going on that are continually posing that threat to yourself. Again, whether you want to stay in that state or not is a separate issue, but again, in that situation, that emotion is being reactivated time and over again. But in many, particularly of our social interactions, where we're still so angry that X, Y, or Z was said to us, or we're ashamed of something, we are actually recreating the situation to bring up the emotion again, because the initial emotion is gone unless we're reactivating it. So central or tied to that is my claim that any situation has multiple aspects to it. Even if it seems like a life or death situation, every situation has multiple angles to be considered from, multiple possible views to be experienced, and there is nothing intrinsic about a situation or a special angle or viewing of it that makes that the most important one. Importance is a choice, particularly once we're aware that it's a choice. So, again, with the threat of Russian aggression in Ukraine, some people's ongoing emotional state is fear. Some people's state who are living right there is anger, and that's promoting them to fight back. Some is sadness about what they've already lost in terms of friends, family, building, way of life, culture. Some people are able to use even, and this may sound sacrilegious, but can use even humor in a situation like that and see some moment of joy in being able to view it essentially extract themselves from that situation and view it from a different angle. So again, the situation itself doesn't dictate or say which is the most important angle or aspect, and it's when you focus on, the unfairness is what's most important, that you wind up feeling anger. It's when you hold on to that the sadness or loss has to be the most important angle to it, that you're going to be suffused with sadness. I hope I said that right a second ago. Again, if you hold on to the unfairness, it's going to be anger that you're holding on to. But if it turns out that anger isn't helpful to you and it's actually more detrimental and you want to let go of it, then part of it is maybe helpful is looking at what other angles that are true, valid aspects of that situation can I choose to make a more important one. So getting back to changing or altering emotions, or particularly patterns of long-term emotional response. So again, we talked about, so one part of the emotion is your action tendency. So again, anger is one of the few that makes you lean in. It makes you talk louder. It makes you, again, blood is preferentially shunted to the big fighting, running, moving muscles. And this is a corner of DBT's, an element of DBT's way, dialectical behavioral therapy's way of working with emotions. If you do something against what the action tendency is making you to do, it's a lot easier to shut down that emotion. So if you're angry, whispering, you can still be angry when you're whispering, but it's a lot harder to than when you're shouting. Sitting down, backing up are both good ways of breaking up that action tendency and making it harder to be angry. Smiling when you're feeling sad. A true smile activates joy, a competing emotion. if you're disgusted by something, but you're exposed to eating crickets in a different culture and you're used to thinking of insects as disgusting, acting against the tendency, smelling it, tasting it, chewing it, is going to help eventually work against that disgust. So one approach, again, is working against action tendencies. The second major access is reframing your templates for what those triggers are. So I use the example of snakes. Lots of people are afraid of snakes or spiders. If it's important to you to unlearn that fear, or particularly if that fear is excessive, then, again, this isn't going to help you in that first instant where you initially see something that fits your template. This is how to change your template. It can be learning more about spiders first. It can then be watching pictures of spiders or snakes. It can then be learning to touch or hold snakes or spiders. So even though, again, we have templates for what will trigger each emotion, those templates are things we can unlearn, we can change, we can shape. I'm going to go off a little on a tangent, but it's still centrally the topic of emotions. So I think emotions also are the most valuable way of looking at or working with dreams. I know particularly the Jungians have elaborate symbol systems where, if you're wearing blue suede shoes, that means a certain thing, and I think there's some probably kernels of validity and interest in them, and people, they're fun ways to do it, but if you're interested in what's going on in your dreams, look at what's going on at an emotional level. That will tell you what's going on. That will tell you what this dream is about. And some of our more recent work on dreams suggests that most of the purpose of dreams, again, this is an evolutionary conjecture, but there's consistent basic science to back this up, that the purpose of the dreaming part of life is to incorporate discrepant, odd, disturbing incidents in your own life and to fit that into a coherent view of what life is all about. And again, that's working with assimilating or fitting emotions in. So I've presented a bunch of sort of basic information because emotions, we all have them, we're all going to keep having them, and learning to accept and work with them is going to be important, whether you have a mental health condition or not. So next week's topic, sort of fitting in with our shifting to the daylight savings time, is going to be seasonal affective disorder. It's moving to the time of year when people are moving out of that state, so maybe it would be better to put that in the fall, but I'm going to be talking about that next week. And I do see one question, so I'm going to try to read that and answer it before I sign off. If you have more questions as I'm talking, write them in. So the question was the more basic, I'm having trouble identifying feelings and tending to shut down when feeling, I'm putting words here, sort of uncontrollably flooded. So the simple approach there, I would say, is starting with reading about, looking at, again, what those basic emotions are, looking at, what that facial pattern is, and beginning to, either with movie or videos or feeling in your body, because anger is going to feel different than shame. Shame is you're going to be putting your head down, you're going to be wanting to talk loud. Shame is, and again with the facial expression, some people can even feel their nostrils flaring, they can see or feel their eyebrows rising. But a lot of this takes work and practice, particularly if the whole topic of emotions is scary, and there are conditions, ADD is one of them, depression is another, where you're flooded maybe by sadness, and that a response to that is numbness. With ADD, about 2/3 to 3/4 of people with ADD have emotions that come up bigger and stronger, and that can be harder to sort out. So again, learning more about the emotions in general, and then learning more about your own body, and even practicing. Okay, if I know that unfairness is a trigger for anger, what can I think about that would make me angry right now, so I can practice feeling what that is and knowing what it's like. If you're angry about racial injustice, if you're angry about Russians invading Ukraine, again, you can create sort of your own little laboratory. Okay, this is anger that I'm feeling now. Or if you want to practice, okay, what is shame? What is fear? What is sadness? Hopefully you throw in joy and the good one too. So I hope that's a start. This will be posted both on Facebook and on YouTube, and I hope you have a healthy, happy week, and I'll be back next Friday at 11. That's all.